let's quickly walk people through what this looks like, what it aims to do.
So many people I have found throughout the state are very familiar with the term shared revenue. So it was a formula devised in the early 2000s to share out state revenue collected from sales tax and redistribute to local governments, which in theory is a brilliant concept, right? The formula, as it was frozen, is frozen since 2004. So how they figured based on population, based on new growth, new property development, all of that is frozen from the 2004 numbers. Now, for some communities, it still works. That formula still is okay. For more than a dozen communities, namely Janesville, which I represent in the 44th, it does not work. That formula goes back to when the GM plant in Janesville was in its heyday, essentially. So you can imagine the dollars, the picture looks quite different now. So shared revenue, still a phenomenal concept. Local government funding is critical, and I believe in local control. Those leaders at the smallest of our towns and the largest of our municipalities, they know best how they need to manage and how they need to grow their communities. But the formula does not work. It really does not work. Last session, back in 2024, there was a patch of sorts, Act 12. It served to kind of try to adjust and account for those inequities, that broken formula. But it didn't go far enough. And many in the legislature felt like, all done, all fixed. It's not. So we need to go back and do some more work to fix it, to bring some communities up a little further, and then do the hard work, which part of my bill is advocating for, creating a bipartisan council to really dig into the math and figure out how we need to update that formula, move it forward, and support our local communities.
And we'll get to Act 12 here in a second, but I wanted to ask about something specific in your proposal. Under your proposal, communities with populations over 50,000 as of 2022 would receive additional supplemental aid to offset inequities, you say, in the existing shared revenue formula. Why communities over 50,000? Talk to me a little bit about this.
Well, you know, I'm a freshman legislator, so as I understand it, that was a rather arbitrary population cap that had to do with feuding among legislators that are no longer in office right now, and that is harmful. It really it put so many communities across the state of Wisconsin at a major disadvantage because they just didn't qualify for as much aid as they needed or quite frankly, deserve. And, again, as a freshman legislator, people knew, they're like, oh yeah, and we know, we hear about Janesville all the time. Well, when we held an information session primarily geared for freshman legislators, and we brought in municipal leaders from across the state, jaws dropped because they realized that this problem was not limited to Janesville. No, indeed, there were so many communities in all corners of the state that really needed a better fair share. And that was the motivation for this to address that population limit, which was, again, pretty arbitrary.
And so I want to talk about something we went back to a little bit ago, which was when Governor Evers signed Act 12 into law in 2023, he said it was one of the most significant sources of funding provided by the state to local governments. Your district, Janesville, received a 22% increase at that time. We kind of touched on this, but how is this legislation specifically different, and is it necessary?
It is necessary because that formula means that Janesville in particular will just flat out never catch up. So the formula is not tied to the rate of inflation. It is frozen, as I mentioned, back in using 2004 numbers. So, 21 years ago, a lot has changed in so many communities. And in Janesville, we will literally never catch up based on the way the formula is written now. And while Act 12, and I do agree with the governor, it was a major improvement. Please, hear me on that. That I'm very clear on that. However, it did not go far enough, and it did not set up our state for improvement and going forward because there was not a great appetite for the hard work, and it will be hard work to evaluate that formula and bring it up to our current levels that we need to be for communities across the state.
And you mentioned multiple times that Act 12 just didn't go far enough. Do you think your legislation will fix the root of this issue here?
It's a patch. It's once again a patch. It's trying to negate any sort of punishment or penalty to those smaller, mid-sized communities. Those small, mid-sized communities, I'll tell you, I go to all of the town board meetings, city council meetings that I possibly can in the district. And I will tell you that roads, EMS are the top two budget items, no matter where I am. I can predict, I know exactly what's going to show up on the agenda every time I go. And they are forced, whether it is the town of Plymouth with 700 people or Janesville with 65,000 plus people, they are forced again and again to do more with less funds. And and the cost of repairing roads, the costs of maintaining, our protective services, our fire departments and police departments, those costs do not go down. And yet the formula is 21 years old. So Act 12 was a big step, and I recognize the immense cooperation and input that it got from the League of Municipalities and the towns associations. And I'm hoping to build off of that momentum and say, good, great, we got something started. We need to take it further. And we need that council, that bipartisan council, to do that hard work, that hard math, quite frankly, of trying to fix that formula rather than hoping somehow, some way, these communities are going to catch up. They just won't. The math isn't there for them.
And so you mentioned that this is a patch in the overall issue here. What do you say to critics who say that this just kicks the real issue here, like kicks the can down the road, so to speak?
Well, great. Join the Shared Revenue Council is what I would say to those critics. Let's get to work. Let's fix that formula. Because again, I think people were truly amazed. During our information session, we had some people kind of tag along and come on along to, support a freshman legislator. Oh yeah, sure, we'll listen to your information session. And then to watch their faces and be like, oh, we have a larger problem. Because I'll tell you, it points to the larger issues we have as a state of funding first responders. We have a first responder crisis in the state of Wisconsin. We don't have what we need in every community. And I've listened to hours of testimony about that. That gets back to revenue. That gets back to local government funding. We don't have what we need to really improve our roads and maintain our services at the level that people demand and, quite frankly, that people deserve. So, we're trying to sound this warning bell. We have an opportunity to get some work done. And, I welcome the critics. I welcome the supporters. That's how good policy is designed. And this affects literally everyone in the state of Wisconsin. I will tell you that, I go to the smallest town boards or I go over to the remote areas, and as soon as I mention the word shared revenue, heads pop up, people pay attention, everyone's got an opinion and some suggestions about how we might fix this. And that's what we need to capture.
And you've talked a couple of times about this bipartisan committee you're hoping to form. Have you talked with Republicans about getting that started?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
What have those conversations looked like?
Honestly, they see me coming down the hall and it's like, I know. Shared revenue. It's like, yep, shared revenue. Come on, let's go. Let's get some work done. And that takes some time to build those relationships and quite frankly, work on building trust that we are after similar things. And that is local government funding to continue fostering local government control. And what that means is that those communities get to really use their voices and get to drive the growth and development of their communities. That's the carrot at the end of the hard work, or the prize at the end of the hard work, if we can get this shared revenue council going.
And do you see this having bipartisan support?
I do, because, based on the numbers and what we're seeing across the state, we're looking at some communities that, definitely, for lack of a better term, are purple, some blue for now, some red for now. And I think, when it comes to funding city and town services, I believe there is a lot of room for agreement and a lot of room for acknowledgement that this is how communities grow. And if we don't get creative as a state and responsive as a state, giving those towns and municipalities more tools in their toolbox so that they can sort of guide their own destiny and grow their communities, we're just creating a problem that, is going to be even larger, for my kids. So, I remain hopeful. I know that, it's not enough to be hopeful. Hope takes work, and I'm certainly ready to dive into that work. We continue to learn and value those voices, maybe who don't necessarily agree with me. There's benefit in that, because at the end of the day, we have an opportunity to make something better.
And I want to ask just kind of real last question here for you to wrap this up, because we saw, like we said, we're talking a lot about Act 12 from back in 2023. And so the last time we saw the legislation like this, one of the biggest sticking points was whether Milwaukee taxpayers would have to approve a tax increase before it could be enacted. Milwaukee City and county officials didn't want to have to take a vote. Now, obviously, we're not necessarily talking about Milwaukee specifically today, but do you see issues like this coming forward while trying to get this legislation through?
I do. If you're speaking to, the possibility of a local sales tax option, again, that goes back to the local governments. It goes back to the local communities to weigh in on such an option. But first, they have to receive that option from legislation that would get passed to allow for that. Milwaukee is definitely its own kind of animal and its own kind of situation, and so. I believe, wherever people find themselves on whatever end of the political spectrum, I do believe that, in their hearts, they're trying to do the best thing for their communities. So I would never, I don't second guess, what people are voting for or what their motivation is for that. But I want there to be options. I want options for communities like Milwaukee. I want options for communities like Plymouth or the town of Center, or the town of Harmony, or Eau Claire, Sheboygan, Oshkosh. I want them to have the options that they need and the tools that they need to make the best decisions to move their communities forward. Because if we don't move the entire community, we all stay stuck.
So it sounds like and you're aware that there could be some challenges on the road to this.
Well, otherwise, what fun would it be, right? But I'll tell you, increasingly in conversation, people want solutions. And I have to believe that wherever you are, you want to take wins back home for your community. And if it means working in a bipartisan way, I think there's a lot of appetite for that these days, where communities, they're hurting. Local governments are hurting. And we all live in one, so I think people want to take a win home.
Wonderful. That's all I have for you today, Representative. Thank you so much for joining us.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.